Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is video premiere with Q&A, Growing in the Galapagos, a Nat Hab Guide Story with expedition leader Josy Cardoso and filmmaker Andrew Ackerman. Thank you for being here today, Josy and Andrew.
Hello.
Thank you, Brooke.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
So excited to have you both here. All right, everyone, I will go ahead and play the film. And just FYI, if you have any audio issues, I recommend just turning up your volume as loud as it can go. I cannot adjust anything on my side. So just, I wanted to let you know that, but let's get the film rolling. All right, here we go.
Galapagos, for me, is the most magical place. Once you get in the water, that feels like boom, a whole bunch of energy exploding because of all the animals that are around you. So you mean right in front of your face? The sea lion seems like they're waiting for you. It's come to the water and play with us, please. Make our day. And there we are, trying to swim with them. Looking at the sea lion staring at you, it's like they're trying to tell me something, but they're happy, they're having fun, and I'm having fun. For that moment, when you're having the animals so close, it feels like you forget everything else. All those problems, poof, they disappear. It's gone, because you are living that moment. It's like meditation, and you don't want to end. It's living in a different world. Should I start now? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I was so lucky to grow here in the Galapagos Islands. I was born in Quito, but I grew up here. My mom got divorced of my dad when I was about 5, 6 years old. She was stuck in the mainland, living on a big city, and she didn't like it at all. She was 34 years old when she decided to move with her 2 kids to the islands, a remote area where you only have 5,000 people. And she started all over again. And I think that was the best thing that could ever happen to us. At that time, everybody knew each other, and your parents would let you be alone most of the day while they were working. I remember going to school on my little bicycle, and every afternoon we'll go to the ocean and be playing outside with friends. It was very beautiful to be independent and have that freedom. I feel very lucky that I had the possibility to grow up here in this paradise. Here in Galapagos, 80% of the people works directly for tourism. And my mom, at that time, was working for a tourism company. They offered her 2 spaces to go on a cruise. My mom said, you and your sister will go on this cruise. And I had the most amazing guides and the most amazing experience with wildlife ever. My favorite animal is the dolphins. So I told the guides, I wish I could see a dolphin. And one of the guides said, Josy, I promise you we're going to see dolphins. I say, how can you promise that? We were there, dolphins showed up, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I just fall in love. You know, that moment that we saw the dolphins, we were looking for them and we saw them, it was like, that's what I wanted to do. I want to be a naturalist guide of the Galapagos. After that trip, I graduated from high school. I was not 18 years old, and a training to become a naturalist guide was offered by the national park, and I was not able to do it. So I said, okay, I have to wait for the next training. I had to wait 5 years to be able to become a guide. And as soon as the national park offered the training, I said, okay, I have to do it because that's what I've been dreaming to do, and that's what I did. My mom always teaches to go for it, to try to get what we want. She's supporting me all the time. Being a guide, she really liked it because she knew I was enjoying it a lot. She's very happy with any choice that makes me happy. I really love her. We're very close to each other. I'm always very impressed of how tough and how strong and how brave she's been in her life. When it's Mother's Day, we celebrate, and when it's Father's Day, we celebrate because she had to do the two things together. And that's when it brings me to tears, always, when I talk about that, because she's incredible. If I'm ever a mom, I wish I can be like her. Yeah. I owe to Galapagos so much because Galapagos has gave me, my mom, and my sister so many things. So I have to give back. At the beginning of the trip, I always like to tell the groups that this is my home. I feel privileged to being able to grow up here on the Galapagos, and it's a magical place. And I really hope that by the end of the trip, it's going to be magical for the guests too. And at the end, they say it was magical, and they will always have Galapagos in their hearts. Sharing with other people, it's what enriches all this work that we do. If you want to be a guide, it's not easy, but go for it. If you have a dream, go for it. For me, I started from zero, and I've always think there is opportunities, hard work, and be persistent in what you do. Sometimes you want to give up, but if you go out to nature and you feel that peacefulness around you, nature recharges the energy so you can keep on going forward. That's the most important part.
Wow, what a beautiful film. I was getting a little choked up, Josie, with you talking about your mom. That was so just touching. And I had that privilege of meeting her myself when I visited the islands in you, so that was just very special. So let's dive a little bit more into your story here. We got a little snippet in that video, but let's talk about the inspiration of you becoming a guide. Could you talk about that a little bit more? It sounded like you had about 5 years between this idea before you could even start training. Was there a moment when you're like, this is it, I'm going to become a guide? What was that moment? And then what is the journey that you took to get you to becoming a guide?
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. So the moment that I decided to become a guide is the moment that I was lucky enough to get in a cruise boat for a whole week and experience nature firsthand with my sister. And I had great guides. That was the time that everything came together. Living in the Galapagos, it's tourism. It's the main economy here. So we will always see the groups passing along the town. We'll go to these natural areas that are nearby the town. And I say, well, that, being in nature and leading people around, it seems very interesting. But then being on board of a cruise, that's what it made the big decision. to say, yes, that was definitely what I want to do, is to become a guide after, swimming with the sea lions, look like finding my favorite animal that were the dolphins, and experiencing nature uh, in the best way possible. And that was already several years ago. But basically, it was the guides. The guides made this great impact on my whole decision of becoming a guide. In that boat, we had four guides, and one it was equally as excellent as the other. So that was the moment that the decision was made in my life. But after that, I had to wait like 5 years, right? Because I was still underage. The training was being offered at that moment, so I was not able to be like to sign in. And I went to the US for an exchange student program to learn more English. And then I went to Italy for a year and a half. I was supposed to study university there, but it was too cold for me. So after a year and a half, I decided to come back. I started a university in Guayaquil studying tourism and hotel management. And I think it was in the first semester that finally the training was offered, and I say, hey, I'm going to put a pause here in university. I'm going to go to Galapagos, do my training, and come back to study again. So that's how, all the things that went in between, from the moment that it was 17 years old and saying I want to become a guide, until the moment that I was able to become a guide. All that stuff happened in between. But even though I traveled to the US, I was, in Europe, I always wanted to be a guide, a naturalist guide from the Galapagos.
How beautiful. And you're an amazing Galapagos naturalist guide. I can tell from experience. It fits you so well. And then, Andrew, I would love to change to you for a little bit. Let's hear your story. You are the mastermind behind the camera, making this beautiful film come to life. So, what about your story? Why did you decide to go into filmmaking?
Hmm, great question. Well, I was lucky enough, when I was 18, I got to go on a cruise as well for a week, in Australia, and it was a dwarf minke whale research boat. And on that boat was a professional underwater photographer. And I didn't even know that that was a job you could have. But I kind of instinctively knew. I was like, well, I don't think I want to do photography. I think I want to do like documentaries. And so that's what in college, I studied film, and I had spent all my money in college on an underwater camera and housing. And then I ended up moving to Colorado because some filmmakers that I really wanted to work with lived in Boulder. And I remember thinking, like, man, that was kind of a waste of money. Like, I just spent it all on this underwater housing. And after being in Boulder for a few months, this filmmaker that I really wanted to work with, he heard that I grew up scuba diving in Florida and had an underwater camera. And he asked if I would go with him to Bermuda in 2 weeks. I was like, yes, 100%. And that became a film called Chasing Coral that you can see on Netflix. So yeah, it was just, I had some amazingly fortunate experiences that showed me what I wanted to be, and then some amazingly fortunate experiences that helped me kind of really learn the craft.
Incredible. And just off the top of your head, do you know how many films you've been a part of or have made since then?
Oh, no. I mean, a lot of short films, like four or five features, and then a lot of short films. That was like 12 years ago, 11 years ago. So yeah.
And we just got a question here. Could you repeat the name of the film that's on Netflix that people can go watch?
Chasing Coral.
Nice.
Chasing Coral.
I know what we're all watching tonight.
Must be a younger version of me. A lot less gray hair. Yeah.
Oh, how cool. Oh, wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. We'll get back to you in a little bit, Andrew. But Josie, we would love to hear more about your story. So you've spent so many years guiding visitors through the incredible islands. To you and your viewpoint, especially now having traveled a lot and guiding in a lot of places, what makes the Galapagos so special? And to you personally, and then also in general, in like a natural history sense, why are they such a destination to go see?
Yeah, Brooke. Yeah, I've been lucky to travel a lot, and also with in our amazing trips that Nat Hab does. And for me, Galapagos, and I always tell the people, it's not because I'm living here. It's not because it's my place, not because it's like what I've been doing for 20 years. Because actually, it's going to be this year 20 years of since I became a guide. It's how tame, how fearless, how friendly, or how naive. I don't know the specific word for the animals here. This is so far the only place where you need to be careful not to step on the animals because there's so many crowding the trails and next to you and flying and almost hitting you, or the sea lions or the turtles. It's I'm still amazed why the animals are or behave the way they do. Of course, there is a whole bunch of things that we have done it right as Galapagos, but that's what it's very special about this place. And it's also, it's not only that you come to see one animal, it's about a whole bunch of animals that come together in 1 week or in one single spot. It's just overwhelming how close you can get the animals, and and they're not going to be flying away for you to get a photo, or you don't need to see them with the binoculars because they're far out. They're going to be right there in front of you posing. You'll get bored pretty much of seeing them and how well they are as a model for your pictures. So that's what is special for Galapagos in terms of wildlife. Then also, why is it special Galapagos? It's because it's such a trip that it gives you different activities. You walk along the trails, you can kayak, you can snorkel, you can dinghy ride. So it's like 4 or 5 things, different activities in one single trip. I know that for the nature of other trips, you can only walk, or you can only, do observation from a vehicle, because that's the nature of that place. But the nature of this place is about snorkeling, dinghy riding, walking on lava fields, walking on smooth terrains. So it's you are always busy, and it's different. It's very one activity is very different from the other one. That is not you can be here a week or two and you will not get bored. Tired for sure. Bored, I don't think so. And that's what it makes the trip itself and Galapagos very special. And I think another important part is how well the government has managed through the national park. That is the institution that puts all the rules and regulates tourism. How well they have managed tourism since the 70s here on the islands. So if we think about it, having 80 boats at the same time going around the archipelago, you hardly are going to find more than 5 next to you, because they regulate it very well through an itinerary system that everybody needs to follow. They tell you how many groups have to be in each place at the same time without bothering each other. For the national park, it's very important the experience of our guests. And they tell you also if you can go in the morning or you can go in the afternoon. And in that way, they have spread through the islands the 80 boats that, sometimes you hardly see any other boat. Or if there is 5 boats, you may meet one group in the way back or in the way in, but you just keep the space between the groups and you still feel like you are alone. So that's sometimes hard for me when I go to other trips, around the world in general on my own. It's like meeting a whole bunch of other people in the same trail. It's like I am so spoiled that I always like to have the things just for myself or just for my group. That then here I am with maybe another dozen guests sharing the same spot that we are visiting. So that's what also makes Galapagos very special. And then every now and then that we have travelers, like last week, we just had a guest that was here in the Galapagos 40 years ago when tourism just started. And people that has been 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and they say, oh my gosh, is it still, they say it's still the same as 30 or 40 years ago, but a lot more comfortable. A bathroom, it's not fish every day for meals. It's just the comfort has increased, but the quality of nature and how you enjoy the islands, it's pretty much the same as when tourism just started. So that's what it makes, Galapagos so magical.
Oh, I could not agree more. And as a conservation biologist, just being there on the islands was like, oh, it's like being a little kid in a candy shop. It was amazing. And for context, really fast, for those of us who might not have been on the islands yet, could you maybe explain like how many islands there are and like what is like the distance between them so that when we're thinking 80 boats, like what's the context of that?
Yes, we have an archipelago of, depending the book that you are reading and how old it is, they categorize the islands or they make it an island or they, do it as an islet. But we have 12 major islands with more than hundreds of rocks and islets around. So having in the map, you'll see the islands close to each other, like the world map behind me, everything looks close to each other. But the islands are hours of navigation. From one spot to the other one, we have to do 6, 7 hours of navigation, and some of the other spots is 11, 12 hours of navigation. And each island has different spots, different visiting spots. So that's why you don't meet the other boats around, because we have this itinerary system that is 15 days itinerary. So the boats are, we have around 60 visiting spots available for us to visit. So that's why the islands are far apart from each other. Like if you plan to come here, sometimes people says, oh, but those are long navigations. Yeah, they are. It's 11, 12 hours away. It's an open ocean. And in each island, in one island, we can spend like Isabela easily 2 or 3 days because there is so many visiting spots. And each spot is, within 2 or 3 hours of navigation. So it's not even like they're close to each other in the same island. And the islands are very big. 97% it's national park protected and 3% is where we live. So from those 12 major islands, 4 islands have people living in it. Santa Cruz, Isabela, Floriana, and San Cristobal. And where we live is part of the 3% and is restricted to already specific places where we can have our farms, our homes, our businesses. And usually the 60 spots that are out there available to visit are in the 97% of the protected area.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for that context. So it's like, okay, let's actually like let's put this in our brains, the size and scope of what this place is, because it is quite bigger when you're there than when you are looking at just a map. And the next question, since you grew up in the Galapagos and you've been a guide now for almost 20 years, congratulations. That's an incredible run. How has conservation in the Galapagos changed during your time as a guide or even as a little girl, if you want to reflect all the way back? And are there any unique challenges that are going on the islands right now that maybe would surprise people that we might not have heard about?
Yeah, since I started guiding, I don't know, it's sometimes people just lose hope in the humanity. But here, I mean, Galapagos always surprise us and give us hope for the future. I remember so we have the protected area, the land area that is national park, and we have a marine reserve that is also protected area. Both areas are human heritage and are protected by the UNESCO. So also our waters, our waters are highly rich in sharks, in manta rays, in turtles. And as you know, these big creatures are very migratory. So they do not only stay in the Galapagos, but they also go north, they go east, so they go, to Costa Rica, down to Colombia, back to Galapagos. And one of the major challenges is industrial fishing, like worldwide. Not only affects the Galapagos Islands, but in general, different countries. And when I start guiding, we were hearing, yeah, about this, we should create a marine corridor that forms this triangle where our marine species migrate so we can protect them better. Because if we protect them here in the Galapagos, there is no industrial fishing allowed, but species do not know about boundaries. So of course they can go and have a trip to Costa Rica or down to Colombia, back to Galapagos, and they may get fished there in the way. So they were saying, no, we have to find, to do this protected area that involves all these other countries, but it's going to be very hard. And I say that's never going to happen. Like get countries together for protection of a big piece of, ocean, and fighting or getting into agreement with industrial fishermen, this industrial fleet is never going to happen. And suddenly, a few years ago, in my lifetime, it happened. So all these countries created this huge marine reserve that forms this triangle that is called La Hermandad Marine Reserve. That now it's a new challenge, because now it's declared as a protected area. Now we have to find the way of how we're going to protect that. That's the second step. But I thought that was not going to happen. I said, no, that's impossible. How you are going to find this big industry that is the industrial fishing, plus getting all the countries on an agreement? And that happened, And I was like, oh, Josy, so there is hope for the future in this, in these aspects. Also, in Galapagos, we haven't lost that many endemic species. It's one of the most well-protected archipelagos that still conserves the original flora and fauna. We have lost some species, but if we compare to other areas, it's almost nothing. So that's also another big win that gives you hope. And now also another great thing about the Galapagos is that the schools in their curriculum, in their pensum, where they tell you what are they going to teach you throughout the school and high school, now it's adapted for the Galapagos reality. So the kids are going to learn about conservation, they're going to learn about Galapagos, they're going to learn about the species. When I went to school, we didn't have specific classes about that. We just knew we had animals out there in our backyard or in the ocean, but we didn't have a specific subjects to study. Now they have, and that has been, happening. It's like maybe 7-8 years ago. So that's also, another step forward in terms of having hope for the future. So having, the schools dedicated to teach you about conservation and what happens on the Galapagos is a great win. Having this new protected area to protect these migratory species is a great win. Not losing that many species as in other parts happen, that's another great win. And now, like the system that we have for tourism and how it's managed is a great success. Of course, nothing is perfect. We have a lot of things that can be improved, a lot of challenges like they introduce species, but it still is a good example of how Galapagos has protected their natural resources. Plus, in the other side, in the community, as a community level, we are very, forward thinking. We don't allow plastics, single-use plastics to come in. Everything has to be reusable or in glass. No styrofoam comes in. You have the quarantine system inspecting your bags when you come, just to make sure we're not bringing invasive species. So even the community, it's in for that. So that's also, a big success. When you go to the mainland and then you say, okay, where I'm going to put my trash, they have no selection of waste. And it's like, what? We're on a small island, we do it. And here in a big city that should be everything more easy, doesn't happen. And then you go to other countries and you still, you get plastic water bottles or straws or styrofoam, and you say, my gosh, why? You have a lot more resources than us, that we're a remote island. So all those things, are stories of success here on our small community. We are 30,000 people living in the archipelago, more or less, 30,000 people. And there is also a migratory restriction for people to move in because we only have 3% where we can live. So all these regulations are basically to save and to protect the flora and fauna.
Yeah, beautiful. It's just so forward thinking, like you said, to establish this, decades ago and how it's still protecting the land now. So, from your opinion, and your just years of experience, how exactly does tourism fit into these conservation impacts, like both positively and negatively? Because we know we gotta discuss both. Where is
Mhm.
it in the grand scheme of protecting the islands?
Yeah, actually impacts positively because we are the eyes of the national park out there in every visiting site in the marine reserve. As you know, most of the public institutions maybe don't have the money, maybe they don't have the resources, the amount of people that they need in order to do patrol. So who are the ones that are patrolling the Galapagos? It will be the tourism boats or the daily trip boats or the little boats that are going in a vivencial fishing tour with the guides. So we know who has to be there. Whenever it's very rare, I don't think it happens anymore, Brooke, that a boat, like we have these boats that go around the world. And right now is the season where these little catamarans or sailing boats are stopping before they go to Las Marquesas in the Western Pacific. Before, when I start guiding, I remember seeing one or two of those boats on a visiting site, and they're not allowed to do that. Usually they don't have the money and all the permits to do that. So you will report right away, or you approach the board and say, what you're doing is not legal if you don't have the permit of the national park. So right now that doesn't happen anymore because we have boats and guides every single day at all times in all of the visiting spots. So tourism has helped a lot to protect the flora and fauna that we have here and to make the regulations to be followed by everybody. And then of course we have our not good things that comes with tourism that, as I always say, it's not a matter of saying no. In order to protect this space, you don't have to come here to the islands. It's about coming to these little ecosystems, these little magical places to create awareness, but do it in a very regulated way. So anyway, whether it's here to the Galapagos or to Antarctica or to Alaska to see the grizzly birds, anywhere, you have to be conscious of what you are bringing to that spot. So here, the major problem that we have in Galapagos is the potential of introduction of a species, whether they're animals or they're plants. We are not self-sufficient as an island. We have to bring a lot of supplies by airplane or by cargo boats. So with that, you have a lot of potential to bring introduced species. Therefore, we need to do some inspections and some random checks of your cargo or your suitcases in order to make sure you are not bringing, for example, blackberries or passion fruits or guavas or a kitty cat or a little dog as your pet. Because here on the islands, those plants or animals are not going to behave well and they're going usually to become very invasive. So that's, with tourism and with the population maybe growing and tourism growing, we just have to have more control over the, not being self-sufficient, more control over all the things that we're bringing in, just making sure they're not going to harm our environment. Also, we're trying to be more greener, use more renewable energy. Unfortunately, we're so remote. It's not, having solars. That's one of all the projects that is still there working. Hopefully we can implement more, or maybe wind turbines to get more electricity in that way. We still burn diesel to produce electricity. With even just with us, with the local people, we require more electricity. So that means more diesel is being burned. But little by little, we are putting out these projects. The government has seen the need of implement more of these solar panel areas in order to, not to be that dependent on fossil fuels. And about electric, a lot of people, a lot of our guests says, I wish we could go on an electric boat or our dinghies could be electric. Unfortunately, yet there is not a good electric solution for our dinghies or for our boats. What we do, of course, is, zero carbon footprint in all of our trips. But the a lot of people says, oh, but the thing should be electrical. I say, yeah, but for the ocean conditions that we have, for the power that we need, for the time of response that we need with our outboard engines, there is still nothing in the market. We're always researching, we're always looking forward, if there is a new solution on that. But yeah, that will be, it's also the waste that we're leaving behind as a tourism industry. We always try to encourage the people to take back to their countries their waste, because we can do so much with our waste here on the islands. But to give you an example, with Nat Hab, we have our snacks are no wrappings, zero plastic wrappings, everything we buy in bulk, and we're saving like 30,000 wraps per year in each boat. So that's 30,000 wrappings that used to go to the landfills here. So those little things that we implement in a small scale are being replicated throughout other boats and other companies here. So, you have both. You need to bring people here because that's our main economy, but you need to create awareness of doing it in a very regulated way.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. That was fantastic. So let's now talk about the film. What was it like for you, for Andrew to pop up to come on one of your trips and film you? What was it like having someone behind you as you're guiding and leading your trip? Did it change the way you interacted, or did you naturally just like go into the starlight? But from your perspective, what did it feel like having someone documenting your everyday on a trip?
Yeah, actually, it was a lot of fun. I'm very comfortable doing like setting up everything that they need in the operation on the ground. I'm not nothing's usually impossible. Andrew, what do you want? Okay, let's do it. Of course, then later on, Andrew taught me a new word, organically. Everything has to look organically because he came and I was like, okay, Andrew, tell me the questions. Oh no, Josy, don't worry about it. There are no questions. I'm like, so how are we going to do a video if I have no questions? No, everything has to be organically. I say, okay, good. There's no questions, no script. And yeah, I didn't feel uncomfortable because at the end I had to Andrew says, you just have to be you, and I will just be filming you as you guide. So that's what we were trying to do, that here in town. I remember, but we didn't have the good conditions. It was rainy, it was windy, it was mosquitoes, the scenery was not good, there was not that many animals, and so we were not able to get any footage while he was here in town. So then Andrew had to go on board, and I say, okay, so now what are we going to do, because we have nothing. And it was a chance actually to go on board, me as a guide, and then we went on board in the same trip that Andrew was scheduled to be. And then, yeah, and then of course, then it's so easy because nature is there. Of course, it was in July, I remember that, and it was cloudy and maybe a little bit of drizzling, and we didn't have a good day to just sit and talk, to do the interview until the very last day, I think. It was now or never. And then I say, okay, but I don't have the questions. How we're going to do it? Josy, it's just organically. Everything has to be natural. And I was like, Andrew, what organically means, And he was just sit here. I'll sit over there and I will start doing questions. And then he started doing questions. And of course, I was just answering the questions. I didn't know any question that he had on his head. And suddenly I was seeing that, it was starting to get dark, and I was like, oh, how are we going to do, because it's going to get super dark. And Andrew said, no, don't worry, because my camera, it shows like it's like day. And I was like, okay, good, that's a great camera. And yeah, and everything happened on Genovesa at the beach. He started asking me the questions, and I start answering and crying because he's expert to make cry, to cry the people that he's interviewing. and and yeah, and finally the last day we were able to get it, but it was no prep, no set of questions, nothing. So everything was organically done.
Beautiful. Andrew, what about your side? Because obviously, I'm sure you came to the islands with like some sort of a scene in mind or idea. But what was it like for you, like prepping for this shoot, showing up, and then it sounds like you had some difficult conditions to say the least. So talk about this from your perspective. What was it like?
Um, yeah, I mean, most of the filming for these kind of films is truly just like fun and stress free. The one stressful part is trying to create space to have a really good interview, and that's obviously the most important part of the film is like is Josy's story, right? And that comes from the interview. And the reason that's hard is because, yeah, a lot of times I'm showing up somewhere I've never been. I had been to the Galapagos once in 2016, so 6 years before this shoot. And yeah, we had planned for 4 days before the trip I was on. Josy wasn't supposed to be on the trip. We were going to have 4 days in Santa Cruz, and we both thought plenty of time to get an interview. And then we drove every ounce of that 3% that is privately owned land and and we drove all over from one side of the island to the other side of the island, and it was intense wind or sun or bugs, and it was just like, yeah, I mean, my interview style is very organic, and it's about making someone feel comfortable and then letting someone be themselves, right? And if you're thinking about a bunch of questions I've sent you, you're going to be thinking about wanting to do things well. And from my side, I don't need you to do something well. I just need you to be yourself, right? Because if you're just being yourself, you're being yourself really well, if that makes sense. So you need good conditions for that. You need it to look good, you need it to sound good, but most importantly, you need the person to be comfortable. And when they're doing this and the wind is blowing and your hair is everywhere, like it's tough to sit in the moment and talk about your childhood, right? Like go be somewhere really uncomfortable and then be like, what was it like to be 6 years old here? That's a tough thing. So we hit a point where we were like, oh, this is not going to happen. And so we called up Nat Hab and we're like, hey, Josy needs to come on this trip. Like this has to happen. And it worked out. And then it was great. And the film is 100 times better because Josy was on the trip and we could go snorkeling together and free diving and like be in the wild and see those things, which I feel like also make it easier, I would imagine, right, Josy? It makes it easier to connect to the beauty of the Galapagos when you're actually in it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And Santa Cruz is beautiful, but it's different than like snorkeling with sea lions. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Because I was like, okay, we're going to be in town. The places that are in town are not nearly as beautiful as the ones that you see on board, when you are going on a cruise. How are we going to, make it happen?
Yeah. So good lessons learned. But no, it was really fun. And yeah, so like I often feel like in filmmaking and in probably many parts of life, like creativity comes from constraint, you know? Um, Having a million options is probably a harder place to be creative than having just a few. So having the constraint of like, oh, we need to think of something different. What we had planned isn't going to work, created something so much more impactful and beautiful and powerful, because getting to see Josy as a character in all these places she's describing, and like you feel that a lot more. So it ended up being a blessing, even though it was quite difficult at the time. Yeah.
Oh, and I'm sure that all of your years of expertise really came into play there to make these drastic in the field changes really fast, and it ended up being something so much more beautiful, was just best case scenario, right? And just out of curiosity, since I've never been on one of these expeditions or have created a film like this, what is the average amount of time it takes for someone like you to create one of these films? How much prep work goes in to one of these
Mm,
before you even get on the plane with your gear to go shoot?
it really depends on the complexity, but I mean, some of them we've spent a year doing pre-production before we hop on a plane. Um, this one probably wasn't a year, but it was probably, 6 months of figuring some things out. Then you get there and it all changes, and that's kind of that's often how it goes. Is like you spend all this time figuring it out, and then you get there and it changes. But no, this one, because this trip was on a Nat Hab trip on a ship, there wasn't a lot we could do. So this one didn't require so much pre-production because it wasn't like we could be like, okay, at Genovesa we need, we need the birds lined up this way and the sea lions lined up this way, right? Like you just kind of joined the ship and then we saw what we saw and we made things happen. But certain shoots that are more interview, like if you have lots of interviews with lots of different people and you're like in a place for longer, and you're making up the itinerary, the pre-production can be quite intense. But this one, it was just Josy and I starting to get to know each other before I showed up, so that I wasn't a total stranger when we started hanging out and talking and filming, and that really helped. So yeah.
And that was the perfect segue to my next question. I mean, you during your interview, you connected with Josie so much that she was obviously in tears, being moved by the interview that you were having with her. How do you develop this trust with your subjects on these films to be able to create so much emotion, authentic emotion of themselves? What's the tips and tricks or your little secret sauce to get the organic out?
Yeah, I have a pretty specific process, I guess. And for me, it kind of stems from like viewing the interview as almost sacred, of like this is a very safe and unique place where even with your closest friends and family, it's pretty rare that you just sit down and are totally curious about someone's life for an hour, 2 hours, right? Like even people I love dearly and know really well, it's pretty rare that I'm just like, what was this like? What was this like? What was this like? So there's something very special about that I find, on my end. And a lot of it too is just like part of the trust is I'm not here to take from you, right? So many people in film and so many people who have engaged with film industry have these really bad stories about, um, like how people ask them questions or how their questions were used afterward. And a lot of it is like, how do you build trust with anyone? You kind of show them your intentions over and over and over again, and you prove that you're really just trying to connect with someone on a human being. So, right, like I didn't when Josie and I first started talking, I was like, I don't need anything from you. I don't want anything from you. I want to tell your story, but I don't need you to get it right. I don't even know what that means, right? That's where the organic process comes from. If you had questions, okay, say my question back to me. How did this make you feel? Well, the way this made me feel was like, well, that's not how we engage as people on a regular basis, right? So if you make someone feel comfortable by just being a human to them, right? I feel like it allows people to like, oh, they're not trying to get me to say something. They're not trying to take me somewhere, right? They're just curious. And so, I mean, Josie can speak more to that on her side too, but like that's my process is I just I don't know what the story is because I don't know you yet, right? And we'll find that out together, but it'll be if someone can tell you why they do something, and it doesn't matter whether they're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or a janitor in a public high school, like it's going to be fascinating, right? If you can get to the why, it's going to be a really interesting story because the why is where all of us humans kind of live together. So that's kind of my whole philosophy and how I like to build trust and yeah. But I'm curious how Josie experiences that.
Yeah, it was, after Andrew arriving, and I was like, okay, give me the set of questions that I should start, doing like the whole thinking process. And he said, no, don't worry about it. And I was like, he seems pretty chilled, so maybe everything's going to be just relaxed. And yeah, and then, as we met with Andrew, we were running here, running there, the weather, la la la, and then figure out like I have to go on board. And I said, well, see you in 3 days, Andrew. And finally it happened. I didn't see him, I thought he was going to be with a notebook and with a pen, opening and starting to read the questions. But no, he wasn't. He was just sitting there, getting my microphone right and his camera. And then he started just, for sure he has for sure Andrew thought about the questions, something, but he didn't have it like in a specific order, or he was not a structure, like something very formal. So that make also the people feel relaxed, because you could see that he was coming up with questions and it was so easygoing. So then you start relaxing and just answering the questions, and both of us laughing about stuff, me crying about stuff. But I could feel in Andrew that he really feel and meant those questions. And it was not like on a notebook, right? Okay, here's the set of questions or the paper that I have for you. So it was great.
And it really showed through with that film. It was very beautiful. Everybody, this is my last question for Josy and Andrew. So start typing in your questions. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, and I want to see what type of questions you have for Josy and Andrew here. But my last question for both of you, you've already mentioned several moments that sounded like they were definitely just ingrained in your brain. But what is your favorite memory or moment or funny or anything that sticks out from the time you filmed together? Either of you, who wants to go first? Which one came to mind first?
Yeah, I remember the frigate birds attacking Andrew's drone.
Yeah, that was scary.
Yeah, that for us it was a lot of fun, because we say, oh my gosh, there suddenly 20 frigate birds are attacking Andrew's drone. What's going on? Is the drone going to end up in the water? And then the other funny stuff that I learned, remember, Andrew, how do you call those things that I put in the front of my car to protect from the heat? The
Like the wind, like the windshield kind of thing, like the
uh-huh,
reflective board.
exactly. So I just got those, and I didn't know whether the aluminum color was on, in which side, or the blue color, and I was just putting it in the wrong way. And Andrew was so nice that he didn't mention anything about it until I asked him, hey, but do you know exactly which color should I put where? And he said, yes, Josie, it's this other side. But I didn't want to mention anything and be the boy or the male that is teaching you how to do this.
Mansplain.
I didn't know how to do it.
Oh, that's really funny. I forgot that.
Yeah.
My favorite memory was there was this day that we were snorkeling the whole day, and we were trying to find penguins, and they're so fast underwater, and we kept kind of like, because Josy and I would kind of go off and do our own thing while the group was swimming, kind of slowly, and we would like, she would dive down further than I would, but we'd dive down and get some cool shots that you saw in the film. And then we'd hear the group saw penguins, and we were like, oh, let's go back over there, and we kept missing them. And then finally, like, we dropped the group off, and then I don't remember the name of the dinghy driver, but we were like, what if the three of us just go back? And then we spent like an hour just playing and chasing with penguins, and we'd like jump in the water and we'd wait, and then this flight of them would zoom by us, and we'd swim with them for a second, then we'd swim back to the boat, zoom back ahead of them, and it was just so much fun. Yeah, that was really fun.
Wow, that does sound incredible. I remember I had one particular penguin encounter when I was there in 2018, and I'm pretty sure I squealed underwater. It was so incredible.
They're so fun to watch underwater. Holy smokes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have felt the exact same. So to have an entire hour with them, that must have been so special. Wow. Well, all right, everybody, we have a few minutes for some questions here. So let's just dive on in. A few have come in. So here's a question about your mom, Josy, actually. What is her origin story? Was she from the Galapagos and moved back, or was she originally from Ecuador and just had this amazing moment where she wanted to move to the islands?
No, yeah. Originally, she was born in Riobamba. There is a town in the highlands, and then she moved when she was 15 with my grandparents to Quito. So she was working and living on a big city for a while. And then, when she was definitely decided to divorce my dad, she was offered a job here on the islands, and she said, "Hey, I'm taking that opportunity. I want to get out of the city." And there she came to a remote island with 5,000 people with her two little girls. But she was yeah, from the city, from the capital of Ecuador.
Wow, that is and such a cool story. I feel like that one needs to be told. Oh, has she written a book yet? I feel like she should write a book.
Yeah, right.
Next, this is a really good conservation question. So, are you seeing or anticipating any impact on the ocean as the temperature rises around the islands?
Actually, the last week I was with one of our colleagues, and he does research on Galapagos petrels. There is an endemic bird, and he's always going on these field trips with scientists to tag penguins and flyless cormorants, get blood samples and all that. And we were talking about, and the latest news is that in 2050 the ocean level is going to raise like a meter and a half. That will be like 4 or 5 feet. And the places, some ecosystems, but not only here in the Galapagos, right? Worldwide. But some of the ecosystems that are going to be affected are these brackish lagoons, where flamingos happen to be, or white-cheeked pintail ducks, or like lagoon birds, are going to disappear because they're going to be connected with the ocean. So we were talking about is maybe the flamingos or these birds are going to find other areas, right? Hopefully, and be able to adapt and survive. Or maybe we'll be losing some species. But that's the prediction. Like in 2050, meter and a half of the ocean level is going to rise. And the first ecosystems that are going to be lost are those ones.
Mm, yeah, that's just the reality, right? And hoping that we can get ahead of the system before that happens. This one is actually for Andrew. So, in the post-production of the film, did you have a difficult time deciding which shots to use or not use or cut, or what was that process like?
Hmm. So at this point, I would say that we've done this enough. There's a team of us. We have several editors. We have several people who go out in the field and do the shooting. And at this point, we kind of have a pretty good sense for like which our favorite shots are and which shots aren't quite as good. So before we do any storytelling, we have an assistant editor go through and label all of the shots in order of like best to worst. And that's kind of subjective, but we've developed as a team like our taste. So when you actually go to make the film, that's been done. Then you just focus on the interview and you just start telling the story with the interview with no music, no other shots. Once the story really works, then you start putting in other shots. And it's actually not so difficult if you've done this the way I'm describing, where you've been very organized, because Josy's talking about this and you go, great, we need some shots of Josy walking because she's talking about this part of her life and that will match this really well. Oh, she's talking about being out in the wild. We need some shots of her out in the wild. Cool, these are the best ones. So if the more organized you are before you actually start, the easier it is to pick the right shots for the right places once you're in the midst of it. There's always times where you're like, oh, should it be this one or this one? But the more organized you are up front, the easier that becomes.
I think that's a good tip for probably any of us in a creative endeavor. Let's be organized from the beginning and it'll work out way better in the end. Well, all right, we have reached the top of the hour, so I will go ahead and end the Q&A section, but I will turn it to you guys for any last closing comments. So Josy, you go first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brooke and Andrew, for making it happen. It was a lot of fun 2 years ago to have you here. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in our webinars. And you are more than welcome to come to the Galapagos. Don't wait too much. It's beautiful. It's a life-changing experience. And of course, it's a lot better with Nat Hab. It's great. It's the only way to do it.
I second that opinion. I'm already scheming for how I can get back as soon as possible. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Josy. It's such an honor to tell your story. Really appreciate your trust. If you want to see more films like this, go to nathabfilms.com. I'll throw that little plug in there. And yeah, thanks so much, Brooke. Thanks for doing this.
Yes, thank you both so much. I highly enjoyed this, and I hope that everybody did as well. So, thank you again, and thank you to everybody. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.